Okay, so the topic that we've been learning in the laws of lost objects, finding lost objects, is that when there is an object that was found, and you don't know if the owner knew that he lost it or not, he doesn't realize yet maybe he lost it yet or not. So the rule is that maybe the owner doesn't yet know about it. And now, if you picking it up to find that owner, great. But if you think, hey, maybe it's Hefker or something, I'd like to acquire it for myself, we come into a serious question, which is maybe the owner doesn't know about it. And now, let me backtrack. Finding a lost object depends if you have on it a sign or not, an identification mark, which would allow you to possibly be able to identify the owner. So if there's a siman, so then the law is that you're not allowed to take it. Why? Because the assumption is the owner will not miyayish, he won't give up hope, he'll want it. And if you're going to take it, you're doing a biblical prohibition of theft. This is a clear case. The Gemara on 21b, Bava Metzia says that this is called Yish Shalom Das, Yish without the knowledge of the owner. We say a davar that has a siman, an object that has an identification mark on it. Nobody argues. Abaya, Rava, they all agree that you're not allowed to take it. When would they argue? When there's no siman, when there's no identification mark. According to Abaya, it's not going to be allowed to be taken because this is called Yish without the knowledge of the owners. And we say that when right now maybe when they find out they'll be mafker, but right now they don't know about it, so we can't say it's hefker. So if you take it, you're taking it a forbidden way. And Rava holds it's allowed because we'll assume that afterwards they'll mafker it immediately. They'll give up hope. The halacha follows Abai. We go the chumrah. We say that Yish Shalom Midas is forbidden. If the owners don't yet know about it, it's forbidden. So we brought up in the end of Sif Dalit yesterday, fascinating law. Let's say it's not a lost object, it's a tree, a fruit on a tree. And you say, I want to take this item so that I can use the item. It's a fruit from, I want to have the fruit. I'm sure the owner will allow me to take it because he knows me and I know he's not careful. He doesn't care on these things. So the Alter Rebbe brings, even if he's my friend even, and certainly he'll be fine with it. The Alter Rebbe says, right now the owner doesn't know about it. The owner doesn't know that you're taking Aronena be'isser. So the one who's taking the fruit is taking it in an isser, in a forbidden way. And this is learned out the Gemara Bava Metzia Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis 22b. Anything similar to this topic, this idea. The Alter Rebbe writes at the end that people need to be cautioned regarding this, since they tend to lapse regarding this matter due to a lack of knowledge. Because there's a lot of lack of knowledge in this field. We learned at the end of Sif Dalit that people are unfortunately being transgressing on this law. And I brought you the example last time that if there was, let's say, a tissue or a pen, just using someone's pen without their permission, assuming that they're your friend and they won't mind, it would also not be allowed. Because when you're using it, the owner didn't give you permission at that moment. However, we learned at the end of Sif Hay, and this is how we concluded last time, that there could be a way in which it's permissible to use someone's item without their permission. And he starts off by explaining that there are certain general assumptions that just are commonplace practice. For example, there is the assumption that a woman, even if the money is her husband that's bringing in the money in the home, she's allowed to give tzedakah, small amounts, not massive amounts. She can, buy stuff or give tzedakah, even if it's her husband's money, really, because the assumption is their husband would definitely agree to all this, right? Even though she doesn't have to ask them. And he says that's the minhag, that's the custom. And therefore, a poor person is allowed to accept money from a wife, a woman of some, a woman, because even though it's maybe her husband's money, but nonetheless, the idea is that we can assume that the husband agrees to all this. And that's the derech, that's the way. And the husband's no. Okay. And then in the parentheses, the Alter Rebbe brings v'chein bepardis, which this seemingly contradicts what we said in the Sif Dalet that I just mentioned to you. He says that so too in an orchard. If he is rugil, let's say he's rugil, he's accustomed regularly to eat from this fruit of the owner, midas habaylim, with the knowledge of the owners, then it's mutter. So now it doesn't contradict what we said earlier that you're not supposed to take from someone's field a fruit from their tree, even though they are your friend and they like you. The reason why the Alter Rebbe is a little more lenient by the case of the Pardis, by this orchard, what's the difference? Because in Sif Dalet, it's just your friend who you know that he wouldn't mind if you use something of his. But the bottom line is you haven't yet done it. You just know that he loves you and he wouldn't mind what you'll end up doing. However, in Sif Hey, it's talking about where it's the regular custom of this guy who goes in this guy's field and takes. And the owner always knows about it and always doesn't mind. So therefore it comes out that in Sif Hey, it's specifically not only talking about a person who's your friend and he won't mind if you use his stuff. It's more than that. It's talking about someone where you go into his orchard regularly, well, with his consent, you take fruits. So if you're on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you can take from his fruits. Why not also on Thursday when he happens to not be there? What difference does it make? So in that case, the Alter Rebbe would say, in that case, it must be that the minhag or custom or the assumption is over there, then definitely would be okay. So maybe going back to the case of the tissue or the pen, if every time you go and you take a tissue when you're, the person's house, and he says, take, all the time he tells you. So one time he's not there, l'chora, it should be that it would be fine as well in this case. Whereas what might not be okay is that just because it's your friend and now he's inviting you to his house for the first time, now I don't know if you have a runny nose, you have to bother asking because I don't know if he wants your runny nose to be on his floor. But imagine, it's the workplace and he always asks you to come in his office and he always gives you stuff, so maybe you wouldn't need to bother asking him in the event of taking a tissue, going into his office without an invitation. But if he's just because he's your friend and you know that what you do, he'll probably agree to it, that won't be enough unless, it's real regular that you do with his consent, always taking stuff. Okay. Now, we're going to move on. We're moving on to Sif Vav. And again, in the laws of discovering lost objects and pikadon, mitzia b'pikadon, the Sif Vav talk about the fallen fruit from a tree. It says like this: if a person found te'enim are figs. They found te'enim baderech. They found it on the road. Tachas ilan, underneath a tree. So obviously he fell from that tree, of that te'ena tree. Shunay taladerech, because the fig tree is leaning over the path. Mutar le'echlan, you're allowed to eat the fig tree. You're allowed to eat the fruits that fell on the floor. Afal pi, even though that the Bailim are not knowledgeable, they don't know that the thing fell yet. It's still allowed for you to take it. Now, why? The owner doesn't yet know that it fell. So how could it be allowed? Says the Alter Rebbe, very simple. Because we have another factor to consider over here. Yush. When we know that there is going to be yush, we say that it's hefker, that it's unowned, and you're allowed to take it. How do I know that there's yush? Because everybody knows that after time, when certain fruits will fall off, they just fall off the tree at some point, right? When they fall off, so there's this assumption in the owner's head that the fallen fruits will be hefker, because if he didn't get a chance to pick them up and they fell on the road, goodbye to those fruits. And therefore the owner, even if he doesn't yet know about it, he is nisyayish from the fallen ones. Now remember, I told you before that there is a machlokis, an argument between Abaye and Rava. Abaye and Rava argue about the case of Yush Shalom Midas. And I mentioned that Rabbiya holds that Yush Shalom Midas is forbidden. So so wouldn't Rabbiya then say in the case of fruit that fell on the road it's forbidden? No, I'll say not necessarily. Why? Because the purpose of these fruits, there's a difference between what you lose. If you lose a fruit from a tree when it falls off the ground on the ground, it's very unlikely that the owner assumes ownership privileges on those types of things. He assumes ownership privileges if he drops from his bag a dollar bill or money or I don't know what, but some sort of item belonged to him. But stuff which is part of nature where it falls off the tree, you don't necessarily assume and reserve ownership on even after it fell. And this applies, as the Alter Rebbe says, even most of the people walking on the path of this, where the fruits that fell off the fig tree are Jewish. Thus, there is reason you might think that the owner would not despair of their recovery, for he will assume that Jews would not take produce belonging to someone else. Okay, now, there's another thing the Alter Rebbe says by these cases of the figs. Not only is it that okay, there's a yush involved. There's another thing. When the fruit falls on the floor, often what happens is it gets a little ruined. And sometimes it can get very ruined. It can actually become repulsive when it falls. So now are we going to assume, even though the owner doesn't yet know that specific fruit fell, are we going to say, well, the owner is reserving ownership rights, and he doesn't yet know that it fell, so he's not necessarily miyayish, giving up hope from it. No, it might be a privilege. The owner doesn't want to have all these broken fruits on his floor and gather a lot of flies and I don't know what. So it's not considered important in the eyes of the owner. Litroach lechapis achareha, to bother and to search after it. So we're not going to assume that the owner wants or is going to reserve ownership over these things. Okay, now let's move on. Aval zeisim, however, and this is all learned out in the Gemara Bava Metzia, the same sugya that we were discussing. What if it was not figs, but zeisim and charuvim, olives and charuvim, carobs? Now those things are stronger than figs. They're not as soft, and they more likely when they fall, they're not going to get ruined right away. Okay, and they don't automatically. They're not repulsive when they fall on the floor. So then those types of fruits, usher to take them. It's forbidden to take them. Provided that the people in the path, mainly the pass, are Jewish. Now, because we have a rule that Jewish people will keep the laws of finding lost objects properly. But if if most of them are Jewish, then you would not be allowed to take it. Now, what about tamarim? Tamarim are dates. So if dates fall on the floor, they have the same status of te'enim, of figs, where the owners they get repulsive to the owner once they fall on the floor. Which we said is that the owners would therefore, miyayish, would give up hope from them, even if it was Roy Yisrael, even if it was a place which was majority Jewish. Because the animals and the beasts, they eat them. Machmas metikusam. They tend to eat them, and therefore, since they're very sweet, and therefore we can assume that they're going to be hefker very quickly. You're not going to have a amount of time by the time it falls. Plus, the animals will go after them, so we can assume that it's all hefker. Okay, now when does the above apply? In other words, the license that you can partake of dates and figs. We said that those things were more lenient. You can take from them. So when does that apply? Istam on regular scenarios. Avalingile balabais daitish ain't. But if the balabais shows his intent that he's not despairing from them, he says, "I want my dates and my figs. even when they fall on the floor, he makes it clear in some sort of an action or a speech of his that he doesn't miyash for them. For example, he put little baskets underneath so they should fall directly into the basket. Even though it didn't end up falling in the basket, it still fell on the floor. We can say that he's showing his intent is he wants to have no one take from them. Well, because why? The wind blew it off and it didn't fall in the basket. And it wouldn't be necessary to say that if he put, certain fence around them so that nobody should come there, no animals, no people, so that even if they fell away from the fence, maybe because the wind blew it or something, they still would be forbidden. And the assumption is because the owner might look for what fell over the fence. So we really have to look case by case on how to figure out was the owner trying to intend to keep it even when it'll fall or not. And again, we have the problem of what we said earlier of the rule of Yush Shalom Midas. According to Abaya, it's still considered forbidden. You're not allowed to take it as long as it is the owner doesn't know about it. So again, the principle that we're trying to take out from here is that only when it's clear as day to us that the owner is giving up hope, or that it's the nature of this type of item that we don't, the owner doesn't try to take it, only then and only then do we say that it would be permissible for using. Okay, but if it's the type of item, if it's the type of fruit or so where the owner does want to retain ownership, or we have a suffix, we can't take it. That's what comes out from this. And again, we also have the problem of Yush Shalom Midas. When the owner doesn't yet know about it, it would be forbidden regardless. Okay, now, some people ask, are you allowed to take a fruit off of a tree that is in the backyard, not backyard, in the front yard? You see a tree next to the sidewalk and there's a nice kumquats or beautiful fruits, some tangerines. So if the owner doesn't have any sign on it, don't take the fruits. Okay, if he puts a net around it, we get it, then for sure there's nothing to talk about. But what if the owner did not put any sign or the like? Does it mean you can't take it? So simply, yeah, of course you can't take it, because you have to prove not picking off a tree is certainly a bigger problem. The whole thing we were talking about is if it fell off the tree. If it fell off the tree and it's the type of thing where it gets ruined, usually when it falls, then okay, maybe you can take it. And if it's the type of thing that falls off the tree, it doesn't get ruined, you can't take it. What if it's Roiv Yisrael? Okay, Roiv, maybe there's sometimes mostly non-Jewish, then you can sometimes have some leniencies because you could assume the owner would be Yayish, he would give up hope. But to go to a tree and pick it off the tree without the knowledge of the owner, that's really not okay. That's literally not allowed. So there's no real room for leniency. I want to mention also another thing, that if we look on the laws of She'ela, the Alter Rebbe has laws of She'ela, which is borrowing. So laws of She'ela, I'll tell you what sif it's in. She'ela was skiras v'chasima. So that's the laws of borrowing and renting. So he brings the sif hay over there, that when a person let's say you want to borrow a sefer. So okay, you borrow the sefer, you got his permission to use it. So while you borrow it, it's considered acquired to you. You can learn from it. You're allowed. You can even give it out. Well, you have full ownership rights of it while it's in your borrowing possession. What you're not allowed to, however, do is if you didn't borrow a sefer and you go to your friend's house and you see a sefer there and you want to use it, you want to read from it without his knowledge, Alter Rebbe writes and says, hey, that is forbidden to read from it, whether the sefer is his or it's borrowed in his hands. Similarly, you're not allowed to use any of his items without his permission. Unless you know, bibirur, unless you know certainly that this is the type of item that the owner would not be makbid on. So the question is, what type of item would you know certainly? What type of item would you know certainly that the owner is not makbid on. So the Alter Rebbe says a very interesting rule. He says if the item is something where we can say certainly he's not makbid, it's some sort of clear as day type of thing that he doesn't care about, that you use it without his knowledge, go ahead, you can use it. However, if it's something where some people are makbid, some people care about it, most don't. So you'll say, look, 90% of the people don't care. 10% are care. I assume I could follow the majority. The Alter Rebbe says, no, you can't follow the majority when it comes to these issues because it could be an Isser Torah. It could be a prohibition, a biblical prohibition. Rather, you have to know absolutely and not rely on majorities and on what we call in Hebrew, roiv. Ein hochem b'zachar roiv. We cannot follow a majority assumption. So if it would be tefillin, and you say, well, majority of people don't mind. You really can't use it because there are some who do mind. And unless you know, so what are you going to do? Now, if you know this person, you know he doesn't mind anybody who allows his people to use his tefillin without his knowledge. That's fine if you know. But if you don't know, then you couldn't, and you can't rely on what you assume would be majority of people would or would not mind about. Okay, now we go back. We go back to we were up to Sif Zion. Let's say the owner, laws of Mitzvah, he says so too if the owner was a yatom, was orphans. It is asurim hatmar mafil b'stam. You would not be allowed to take the dates even under a normal circumstance when nothing was done to assure that the dates would not be taken. Notice they didn't put baskets on it or something. They didn't put a fence around it. Normally we were lenient about dates, but for a yasam, by an orphan, no. Shaktanim ein yeyoshim mechilasim klum. Why? Because children don't have the din of yush, and their mechila doesn't mean anything. They're not withgoing. They're not waiving their ownerships. The rationale is that a minor does not have the halachic authority to relinquish ownership of property. And therefore, if you really can't take something from a yatom, from a minor orphan, even though that if these same children would grow up, they wouldn't mind. But right now, they don't have that right to relinquish or miyayish. Now, if a child gave as a gift to someone, you're allowed to take it from him. This is part of the Chachamim's rule that children have the right to give gifts. Yatomim, even though that normally children shouldn't be given gifts, they don't have that right. But Chazal made a takana that if they give a gift, it's effective, and this is in order that you should that people will want to do business with them. It's in Gemara in Gittin in Daf 59a. It says that if they give a gift, the gift is a gift. Nevertheless, in present, the present is binding only according to rabbinic law, not according to biblical law. Okay, so therefore there could be like a biblical mitzvah like lulav. If the child gives you a gift, it won't work because you need to own the object. Like a lulav, you need to own it biblically when it says you shall take for yourself. So then we wouldn't be able to rely upon the fact that the sages say that his gift is a gift. Okay, now. In Sifches, I'm just going to start it. I'm not going to do the whole Sifches. It says like this. Let's say you find a thing which is a suffix, it's a doubt if the owners knew that it fell off the tree or not. So in such a, or not if it fell off the tree, just because something fell. You find something on the floor. You go, oh, did the owner know that it fell or not? Maybe if he doesn't know, now it doesn't have simon on it, doesn't have any sign on it. So if he knows about it, then certainly I would be allowed to take it because there's no simon on it anyways. Problem will be is if I don't know. If there's no simon and I don't know if he knows, maybe this is a problem that we mentioned, which is called yush shalom midas, where you can't acquire something if the owner doesn't even know it fell from him yet. So in such a case, if you're not sure, you have to announce it. You can't therefore keep it for yourself. If it has a simon, certainly you have to announce it. And even if you found it in a place where it was mainly goyim, you still need to announce it, provided that there is a siman, because the owner might say to himself, listen, I'll find it. I'll give over the signs of what it looked like and I'll get it back. If there's no siman on it, so therefore the announcing its discovery would be to no help because there's no way to identify who the owner is. So then you should just leave it. Leave it be until Eliyahu comes. What does it mean, leave it till? You should actually keep it. When I say leave it, I really mean you should keep it without making use of it until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. And this is because there's really no solution here. On one hand, if it doesn't have a siman, who are you going to be able to return it to? On the other hand, to take it for yourself might not be allowed because maybe the owner doesn't know about it yet. So we say put it on the side until Eliyahu Navi comes. He'll settle this issue. Or if you could bring witnesses to verify who it came from. Someone will come with witnesses, say it belonged to them. So then you could return it to that person even though there's no siman on it. Because Adam, two witnesses who testify, yeah, we know this item belongs to him. That would be enough to rely on them. Al Pishne Adam Yakam Davar, right? The Torah says that you can rely on two witnesses to establish a matter. And this would help even though there was Yeshivot. Since it was a suffix, it was a doubt, Shema, Ba, the other Bis, or maybe when he picked it up to acquire it for himself, perhaps he took it in the time that it wasn't allowed for him to take it. And then even though later on, when the owners will despair, their despair won't help anything. And we know that if it's a suffix of a Torah prohibition, we should be stringent. So suffix shel Torah, we have to be stringent on this matter. There are certain items that the Alter Rebbe then later on goes on to say that you can rest assured that if you find them, the owner must have known about it. Why? Because certain items he'll check very often and certain things less often. So what is the one example where we assume the owner checks very regularly and therefore if you find it on the floor, you can assume he already knows that it fell? The famous example would be money. Money, the owner is checking often. If he finds money that was coins scattered without a wallet, he can take them as his own. And this is because the clear assumption is that the money is something that the owner checks regularly. All right, so I think we'll finish. That'll be it for today. We got into Sifches. Ezra Hashem.